Robert had learned that life rarely unfolds the way we plan. At 58 he found himself raising his teenage daughter Sarah alone after his wife Margaret had passed 3 years earlier. The house felt too big now, with just the two of them rattling around in rooms that once echoed with laughter and conversation. He stood at his kitchen window one October evening watching the maple leaves drift down like memories. Each one reminded him of something Margaret used to say about how every ending makes room for something new. He missed her wisdom, especially on nights like this when the silence felt heavy. Sarah was upstairs doing homework, her music drifting down through the floorboards. She was a good kid, smart and kind like her mother, but he worried about college tuition coming up fast. The teaching salary that had seemed sufficient when Margaret worked at the library now stretched thin over mortgage payments and daily expenses. That's when he decided to rent out the spare room. The advertisement he placed was simple: clean room available for responsible tenant, good neighborhood near bus lines. References required. Robert figured maybe a graduate student or young professional would be a good fit, someone quiet who kept to themselves. The first few people who responded weren't quite right. One young man seemed more interested in having parties than studying. An older woman complained about the water pressure before even seeing the bathroom. A college student brought along 3 friends who treated the visit like a social event. Then on a rainy Thursday evening someone knocked softly on his front door. Robert opened it to find a young woman standing on his porch. She looked to be in her early 20s with dark hair plastered to her head from the rain. Her clothes were soaked through and she carried a small duffel bag that had seen better days. What struck him most were her eyes, red from crying and filled with a kind of exhaustion he recognized. The exhaustion of someone carrying more than they should. "I saw your advertisement about the room," she said quietly. "I know it's late, but I was hoping maybe I could see it." Robert stepped aside without hesitation. "Coming out of that rain you'll catch your death standing out there." She introduced herself as Elena, and as she stood dripping in his hallway Robert felt something familiar stir in his chest. It was the same instinct that had made him a good teacher for 30 years, the ability to see when someone needed help more than they needed questions. "Let me get you a towel," he said. "Sarah, honey, come meet our visitor." His daughter bounded down the stairs and without missing a beat grabbed Elena by the hand. "Dad makes amazing hot chocolate," she announced. "You look like you could use some." Over steaming mugs at the kitchen table Elena explained that she needed a place to stay while she figured some things out. She was vague about the details, but Robert heard something in her voice that reminded him of his students when they were struggling with more than just academics. "She could pay first month's rent and deposit right away," she said, reaching into her bag for an envelope of cash. Robert noticed her hands shaking slightly as she counted out the bills. "The room is yours," he said before she finished counting. Sarah beamed. "This is going to be so much fun having another girl around." That first week Elena kept mostly to herself. She was polite and clean and always asked before using anything in the kitchen. Robert would hear her crying softly some nights through the thin walls, but he respected her privacy the way he wished others had respected his grief after Margaret died. Everyone needs space to heal in their own time, he had learned. Gradually Elena began joining them for dinner. She was a good listener and seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's stories about school and friends. When Sarah mentioned struggling with her college applications, Elena quietly offered to help proofread her essays. "I have some experience with that kind of writing," she said modestly. Robert watched Elena work with Sarah one evening. Both of them bent over the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. Elena had a natural way of asking questions that helped Sarah think deeper about her experiences and goals. "You really know what you're doing," Robert observed. "Did you go to college yourself?" Elena paused for a long moment before answering. "I studied business," she said carefully, "but I learned more about life outside the classroom." There was something in the way she said it that made Robert suspect. There was much more to her story, but he didn't push. People revealed what they were ready to reveal when they were ready. As autumn deepened into winter, Elena became part of their small family routine. She would have coffee with Robert in the mornings before he left for school, and she helped Sarah with her driving practice in the afternoons. She never talked about work or where she went during the day, but she always came home home Robert realized was what it had become for her. One snowy December evening while Elena was helping Sarah decorate sugar cookies, Robert answered a knock at the door. A well-dressed older man stood on the porch looking anxious and tired. "I'm looking for someone," he said, holding up a photograph. "My daughter Elena. She might be staying somewhere in this neighborhood." Robert's heart sank as he recognized the face in the photo. It was Elena, but polished and professional in an expensive business suit, nothing like the vulnerable young woman who had appeared at his door months ago. "May I ask who you are?" Robert said carefully. The man extended his hand. "James Harrison, Eleanor's father." The name meant something, Robert was sure, though he couldn't place it immediately. "She ran away from home 6 months ago," James continued. "After we had a disagreement about her future, we hired investigators, but she'd been careful about covering her tracks. Then someone saw her in this neighborhood. Robert invited him in. Elena was in the kitchen with Sarah, their laughter carrying through the house." James Harrison stopped in the doorway, watching his daughter with wonder, as if seeing her for the first time in years. "Elena," he said quietly. She turned and her face went through several emotions before settling on something Robert had never seen there before, a kind of resigned sadness. "Hello, Dad." Over the next hour the story came out in pieces. Elena was not just James Harrison's daughter, she was Elena Harrison, heiress to Harrison Industries, a technology company. Robert now remembered from business news her father had been grooming her to take over the company from childhood, pushing her through business school and into an executive position before she was ready. The disagreement had been about an arranged engagement to the son of another business family, a merger disguised as marriage. Elena had finally rebelled and walked away from everything, including access to her trust fund and bank accounts. "I wanted to see who I was without all that," she explained to Robert and Sarah later after her father had left, with promises to return the next day to talk. "I wanted to know if anyone could care about me just as Elena, not as Elena Harrison." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, took Elena's hand. "We care about you just as Elena," she said simply. "You helped me with my college essays and you make Dad laugh at dinner and you never once acted like you were better than us." Robert felt his throat tighten. "Sarah is right. You became family not because of what you have but because of who you are." The next morning James Harrison returned, this time with his wife, an elegant woman whose eyes were red from crying. When Elena appeared at the top of the stairs, her mother's composure crumbled. "Oh, my darling girl," she whispered, "we missed you so much." What followed was not the dramatic confrontation Robert might have expected, but rather a long, honest conversation about love and expectations and the difference between preparing someone for life and trying to control their choices. James Harrison was not a bad man. Robert realized he was a father who had confused providing opportunities with making demands. He had forgotten that love means wanting someone to be happy, not wanting them to be what you planned. "I learned something these past months," Elena told her parents. "I learned that I can be strong without being ruthless. I can be successful without sacrificing my values, and I learned that real wealth is having people who care about you no matter what." She looked at Robert and Sarah. "These two gave me something I never had, a home where I was accepted just as I am." Over the following days the Harrison family worked through years of misunderstandings. Elena would return home, but on her terms. She would work for the company, but in a role that matched her values, focusing on employee welfare and community programs instead of just profits. The arranged engagement was cancelled, much to everyone's relief, including the young man who had his own dreams to pursue. On Elena's last day in the house, Robert found himself surprisingly emotional. He had grown fond of having her around, and not just because her end had eased his financial worries. "You changed us too, you know," he told her as she packed her few belongings. "Sarah has more confidence now, and I remembered what it feels like to help someone find their way." Elena hugged him tightly. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Before she left, Elena insisted on something. She wanted to pay Sarah's college tuition all 4 years as a thank you for being the sister she never had. Sarah protested, but Elena was firm. "This is not charity," she said. "This is family taking care of family." 6 months later, Robert received an invitation to Elena's wedding, not to a business merger but to a small ceremony where she married a social worker she had met while volunteering at a homeless shelter. The invitation was written in her own handwriting and signed simply, "Love, Elena." At the ceremony, Robert watched Elena glow with genuine happiness as she exchanged vows with someone who loved her for exactly who she was. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, having learned that letting go sometimes brings you closer to the people you love. During the reception, Elena found Robert and Sarah. "I have something for you," she said, leading them to a quiet corner. She handed Robert an envelope. "It's not money," she said quickly, "it's something better." Inside was a deed to the house, Robert's house. The mortgage had been paid in full. "Elena, I can't accept this," Robert started, but she held up her hand. "You gave me a home when I needed one," she said. "Now I want to make sure you always have yours." Sarah started crying and Elena wrapped them both in a hug. "Besides," Elena added with a grin, "someone needs to keep that spare room available for the next person who needs a safe place to figure things out." Robert realized she was right. The room wouldn't stay empty long. There were always people who needed kindness more than they needed questions, people who needed to be seen for who they were rather than what they had or didn't have. Sometimes, he thought as he watched Elena dance with her new husband, the most important thing we can offer someone is not advice or solutions but simply a place to belong while they find their way. Margaret would have loved Elena. He knew she would have seen immediately what Robert learned over those months together, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts but in the connections we make and the kindness we show, especially to those who need it most. The spare room is ready whenever someone needs it, and Robert has learned that opening your door to a stranger in need might just be opening your heart to family you never knew you were missing.